Sometimes it's difficult to see that which is right in front of us. Let's pull back and take a 35,000-foot view, if you will, of schooling. I'd like to talk about one reason schools must pursue vigorous, deliberate, and purposeful change. Society. Education has a long-standing purpose of serving society. Whatever the needs of society, that's what schools teach. Over the years, schools changed their focus to meet the needs of a changing society. The first formal educational system emerged in Egypt around 680 BCE, with an emphasis on math, reading, writing, warfare, and hunting. Those skills served society at the time, but warfare and hunting are not day-to-day events for the masses in today's society, so we dropped those subjects. In the United States, 1635 marked the beginning of the first Latin grammar school, a secondary school in Boston teaching boys of the elite the skills they needed for leadership in the church, state, and courts. Of course, down the road, we figured out that girls can make good lawyers, politicians, and clergy too, so over time we have eliminated the gender restrictions in education. Society changes, and schools serve society. My older sister learned to read a slide rule, but the calculator replaced that, and I never learned about the slide rule in school. Society changes, and schools serve society. Take a look at U.S. jobs over the past 200 years. Those careers related to service and creativity are on the rise. If part of the job of schools is to prepare our citizenry for the work of society, what are the implications of this trend? In colonial times, 90% of the population made its livelihood from agriculture: corn, cotton, tobacco. And schools taught students what they needed to succeed in farming, as well as how to read and sing, because they would need those skills for religious participation, as that was a central part of non-working time. The development of the steam engine and cotton gin launched the U.S. into an economy that was highly dependent upon industry. And interestingly enough, in 1848, the first graded school opened, which gave us the factory model of education that remains today. The invention of the computer shifted us to an information economy. The computer allowed us to manage information well and shift to using that information, identifying trends, considering what-if relationships, resulting in a knowledge economy. So if we have all information at our fingertips and we're good at analyzing it, what next? We're now at the beginning of a creative economy. Our economic stability relies on our ability to solve problems creatively. Some people call it an economy based on innovation. This graph was part of a study in Thailand as to how economies mature over time. The reality is, what will drive a country's economy now is the ability to innovate, whether in product or in service. And innovation takes creativity. So how do we prepare students for a creative economy when the factory model of education remains? Let's face it, in a factory, we don't want you to be creative and inventive. We want you to follow a process. Many school children at the time were being prepared to work in factories. Thus, the emergence of rote memorization, students grouped by age, classes departmentalized by subjects, and the term supervisor being applied to those who oversaw the delivery of instruction. The impact of our factory-based economy remains strong in our schools. Evident in most classrooms today is an emphasis on what I call procedural automaticity. Students watch the teacher model a process, whether it be balancing chemical equations, solving a math problem, finding the main idea, painting a still life, or shooting a basket. They then practice it with the intent of mastering it. In the end, they have gained the ability to recall and reenact a process. And most tests, including standardized tests, in the past emphasized procedural automaticity, with students being given questions that mirrored learned procedures. Procedural automaticity, however, does not guarantee understanding. And that's where the Common Core standards come in. They shift the focus to understanding, with the realization that if you truly understand something, you will be able to apply that knowledge to new situations. In my second book, It's Not What You Teach, But How, I introduced the term novelty. the ability to respond appropriately and successfully to novel situations. As an example, let's consider the skill of calculating area. Students soon learn that length times width equals area. When they approach test problems, they look for two numbers to multiply. But what if the problem is to calculate the area of a garden with a cutout for a fountain in the middle? A student who has simply learned the procedure of calculating area will have difficulty finding the answer. A student who truly understands the concept of area will realize the solution is found by calculating the area of the garden and subtracting the area of the fountain. Understanding yields novelty, and novelty empowers the learner to tackle all sorts of problems. In order for schools to serve a society whose economy is dependent upon creativity and innovation and move society forward successfully, they must place an emphasis on a level of understanding that leads to novelty. A beginning step would be to engage students in problem-based learning, solving authentic, open-ended, real-world problems, not as a culminating activity, but as that which drives their further learning. In order to build understanding, students must grapple with content, and grappling is a characteristic of problem-based learning. And not any problem will do. Make it non-Googleable. Asking students to create a model of a cell is Googleable. They can look up the information on the internet and create a model. At most, they grapple with how to present the information. And as a matter of fact, there are YouTube videos on how to make a model of a cell. Asking students to devise a plan to use single-celled organisms to clean up radioactive water is not Googleable. The answer isn't out there. It requires students to grapple with the metabolism of single-celled organisms introduced into radioactive water. Now, creating a model might be one activity in the unit, but the overarching driving problem is to clean up radioactive water using single-celled organisms, a problem with which scientists are grappling today. Asking students to create a book about dinosaurs is Googleable. If you're trying to learn about dinosaurs, as opposed to simply reading and reporting, then students won't be grappling with the content of dinosaurs in this case. Asking them, on the other hand, to design a habitat at the school in the event that the school cloned a dinosaur is not Googleable. Students must grapple with the lifestyle and needs of the dinosaur. They must look at their own school situation, the climate, the vegetation, the habitat that they would need to create. See, if they merely look up information and present it back in a paper or multimedia presentation, they won't be grappling with content. They might be grappling with presentation skills, but they won't build an understanding of the content itself. Reenact the U.S. Constitutional Convention? Googleable. Create a multimedia timeline on how a constitutional amendment is ratified? Googleable. Consider the Constitution and the world today. Make one suggestion for an amendment that will improve the country, detailing what it will take to get it passed. Non-Googleable. Today's schools must help students become creative problem finders and problem solvers. And that means the what and how of schooling must change. The way we view teaching and learning must change. How can schools best prepare students to thrive in a creative economy? A good start would be to use authentic, open-ended, real-world problems to drive learning and instruction. It's time to embrace a paradigm shift and reinvent the idea of school.